The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the sound of laughter above my head. My daughter had locked me in her basement while I was sick, without a phone, because she didn't want her party disturbed. By the time they opened the door the next morning, I was lying on the concrete floor, barely breathing. The irony was almost beautiful. I could hear the music through the ceiling for hours. After she shoved me downstairs, bass vibrated through the pipes. Glasses clinked. People cheered at jokes I couldn't hear. Meanwhile, fever burned through my body like a slow fire. I pounded on the door at first. Then I begged. Then I conserved my strength. The basement smelled of dust, old paint, and damp cardboard. A single bulb cast weak yellow light across stacks of forgotten boxes. My throat was dry. Every muscle ached. I sat wrapped in an old blanket, listening to strangers celebrate while I struggled to stay conscious. What hurt wasn't the sickness. It was knowing exactly why I was there. This was the house I had spent 30 years paying for. The house where I had raised her after her mother died. Every wall carried memories of sacrifices she had never seen and burdens she had never carried. Yet somehow on that night I had become an inconvenience. Around midnight the music grew louder. At some point I stopped knocking. Nobody would have heard me anyway. The room spun whenever I tried to stand. My vision blurred. The cold concrete pressed against my cheek as I slid to the floor. Above me, hundreds of footsteps crossed the hardwood floors I had installed with my own hands. Then everything faded. The laughter became distant. The light became darkness, and my daughter's party continued without interruption. My name is Robert, and for most of my life, I believed being a good father meant putting your child first, no matter the cost. I raised my daughter Melissa alone after my wife died when Melissa was 9. While other parents planned vacations and retirement, I worked overtime, skipped opportunities, and poured every spare dollar into giving her stability. I never kept score because that's what love is supposed to be. Over the years, that sacrifice became invisible. Melissa grew accustomed to solving her problems with my time, my money, and my patience. If her car broke down, I handled it. If she missed rent, I covered it. If she made mistakes, I softened the consequences before they reached her doorstep. She always thanked me. She just never respected what it cost. When I retired, I signed part of the house into her future inheritance so she would feel secure. Friends warned me I was doing too much. They said she took me for granted. I defended her every time. I told myself they didn't understand our relationship. Looking back, they understood it better than I did. The warning signs weren't dramatic. They were small moments that were easy to excuse. A canceled visit, an ignored phone call, a conversation that somehow always returned to what she needed. I wasn't treated like family anymore. I was treated like a resource. And the night she locked me in that basement, she simply revealed what had been true for years. After Melissa moved back into the house, the changes came so gradually that I almost missed them. At first, she started introducing the place as our house when speaking to friends. It sounded harmless and I let it pass. Then our house slowly became my house. Every time I heard it, she said it with such confidence that correcting her felt strangely awkward. When guests visited, she acted like the host while I became an afterthought. I noticed the little things. Conversations would stop for a second when I entered a room. Her friends offered polite smiles, but their eyes drifted past me as if I were part of the furniture. Melissa never encouraged the behavior, but she never challenged it either. One evening, I overheard her laughing with a friend in the kitchen. "My dad worries about everything," she said with a dismissive chuckle. "If I listened to him all the time, I'd never have any fun." The words weren't cruel enough to start an argument. They were worse. They were casual. At family dinners, she checked her phone while I spoke. When I shared stories, she interrupted before I finished. When I expressed concerns, she answered with patient smiles usually reserved for difficult children. "Don't stress yourself out," she would say. Not because she cared, because she wanted the conversation over. Each incident was small enough to excuse on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. A glance, a sigh, a delayed response. A door quietly closed. The respect between parent and child wasn't shattered in a single moment. It disappeared one piece at a time until only the illusion remained. The realization didn't come when I woke up in the hospital. It came 3 days later. By then, the fever was under control, and the doctors were satisfied with my recovery. Melissa had visited exactly once. She stayed less than 15 minutes. She brought flowers, not because she felt guilty, because flowers were cheaper than accountability. I watched her sit beside my bed, scrolling through her phone while explaining how everything got out of hand at the party. She spoke as if the night had been an unfortunate scheduling, conflict rather than a decision she had made. At one point, she actually laughed. I can't believe everyone is acting like I locked you down there on purpose." The room became very quiet. For the first time, I stopped looking for regret in her face. There wasn't any, only annoyance. Annoyance that people were judging her, annoyance that her friends were talking, annoyance that I had survived long enough to become a problem. When she left, she kissed my forehead and said, "Get better soon." Then she walked out carrying the same confidence she'd had when she locked that basement door. I stared at the closed hospital room door for a long time. The truth settled over me with unexpected calm. Nothing was going to change. There would be no apology worth believing, no sudden realization, no moment where she understood what she had done. For years, I had mistaken dependence for love and entitlement for closeness. Lying there, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, I made the first decision that belonged entirely to me. I would stop protecting her from the consequences of her choices. And this time, I wouldn't warn her first. The day after Melissa's visit, I borrowed a phone from an elderly patient whose bed was across the hall. My first call wasn't to family. It was to my lawyer. Richard and I had known each other for nearly 20 years. He had handled my estate planning, property records, and retirement documents. More importantly, he understood that when I spoke calmly, something serious had already been decided. I explained exactly what had happened. No exaggeration, no emotional speeches, just facts. I had been ill. I had been locked in the basement without a phone. I had required hospitalization after being found unconscious the next morning. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then Richard asked a simple question. "Are you certain about what you want to do?" For the first time in years, my answer came without hesitation. Yes. Over the following days, we reviewed every document connected to the house. Legally, ownership remained entirely in my name. The future inheritance arrangements I had created were exactly that, future arrangements. Nothing prevented me from changing them, so I did. While Melissa assumed I was resting in a hospital bed, Richard prepared the paperwork. I contacted a real estate agent with a reputation for handling private sales quickly and professionally. The market was strong, and the property attracted immediate interest. Everything was completed through phone calls, signatures, and carefully scheduled meetings. No threats, no confrontations, no dramatic declarations, just decisions. For years, I had spent my energy preserving a relationship that existed mostly in my imagination. Now I was protecting something far more valuable, my remaining time, my independence, and my peace. And Melissa had absolutely no idea what was coming. I was discharged on a Thursday morning. Instead of returning home, I checked into a small furnished apartment across town. The lease had already been arranged. My personal accounts were secured. My important documents were moved into a safe deposit box, and the sale of the house was scheduled to close that afternoon. Everything happened quietly, exactly as planned. Around 4 o'clock, Richard called to confirm that the final papers had been signed and the funds transferred. The house was no longer mine. More importantly, it was no longer Melissa's future. That evening, I sat by the apartment window watching rain slide down the glass. For the first time in years, I felt no anxiety about what Melissa might need next. Then my phone began to ring. Once, twice, 10 times. I let it continue. Eventually, a voicemail arrived. Her voice sounded confused rather than concerned. "Dad, there are strangers walking through the house with some agent. What's going on?" I listened without reacting. An hour later, another message appeared. This time, the confusion had become panic. The buyers had arrived with documents. The agent had explained the situation. Melissa was being informed that the property had changed ownership and that arrangements would need to be made. No yelling echoed through my phone. No dramatic confrontation took place, just silence followed by reality. The same reality she had ignored when she locked a sick old man in a basement. For once, consequences had arrived without my interference. And for once, I simply allowed them through the door. The reactions spread faster than I expected. Family members who had heard only fragments of the story began learning the full truth. Melissa tried explaining that everything had been a misunderstanding. But too many people already knew what had happened. A misunderstanding doesn't leave someone unconscious in a hospital bed. Relatives who had once defended her became noticeably quiet. Friends who attended the party started asking uncomfortable questions. Some remembered hearing faint banging from downstairs. Others remembered Melissa, joking that her father was being dramatic about being sick. Details that seemed insignificant that night suddenly carried a different weight. Her reputation didn't collapse overnight. It simply lost credibility. People became more careful about trusting her version of events. As for me, the greatest consequence wasn't the sale of the house. It was accepting that the relationship I thought I had with my daughter no longer existed. That realization hurt more than any legal document ever could. For months, Melissa sent messages ranging from anger to excuses to attempts at reconciliation. I read every one of them. None addressed the central fact. When I was vulnerable, she chose convenience over compassion. That truth never changed, and that's why this story matters. Most betrayals don't begin with one shocking act. They begin with small moments of disrespect that go unchallenged for years. The danger isn't being underestimated once. It's allowing people to believe there will never be consequences. Eventually, every relationship reveals what it is truly built upon. Some are strengthened by hardship. Others collapse the moment accountability arrives. People often assume revenge is about watching someone suffer. They're wrong. The greatest satisfaction I found wasn't in selling the house. It wasn't in the frantic phone calls or the sudden realization that I would no longer rescue Melissa from the consequences of her choices. It was the peace that followed. For the first time in decades, my days belonged entirely to me. I moved into a quiet community near a lake where nobody knew my history. Mornings were spent walking tree-lined paths. Afternoons disappeared into books I had postponed reading for years. The constant pressure of being needed, used, and taken for granted slowly faded into the background. Melissa and I spoke occasionally. The conversations were careful and distant. I never tried to punish her further, and I never asked for revenge to continue. Life was handling that part on its own. Whether she learned from what happened was a choice only she could make. As for me, I finally learned a lesson that had taken a lifetime to understand. Love without boundaries is not kindness. It is permission. For years, I confused sacrifice with devotion and endurance with strength. The basement changed that. It forced me to recognize that self-respect is not selfish. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is refuse to protect people from the results of their own actions. The house was never what I reclaimed. I reclaimed my dignity. And in the quiet that followed, I discovered something worth far more than revenge. A life that no longer needed anyone's permission to matter.